All right, so today we're diving deep into bipolar disorder. Those extreme shifts in mood, energy up and down, manic highs, and those depressive lows. But we're looking at it through a pretty interesting lens, and that's past life regression hypnosis.
Yeah, it's definitely not your typical research material, these two transcripts we have from these hypnotic sessions, but they're focused on bipolar disorder. And yeah, we're going to be looking at it critically, not saying that this is scientific fact, but I think it offers an interesting look into subjective experiences.
Exactly, yeah. It's like we're peeking right into their internal worlds, right?
Yeah.
So we have Karina, who under hypnosis goes way back to different historical periods, and she's observing what she believes is the manifestation and development of bipolar disorder, like throughout time.
And then in the other corner, we have Tamara, who's also going through this hypnotic regression and offering a totally different perspective on it. It's interesting that when they're talking about when bipolar disorder first appeared, they have wildly different timelines.
Yeah, absolutely. Karina's like, okay, 1450 AD. She's seeing this university student who's going through this intense inner conflict, describing it almost like a debate between two internal voices,
Oh, wow.
almost like, this angel and demon on his shoulders, just battling it out.
That's a powerful image. I mean, yeah, a lot of people describe being pulled in opposite directions. But then we have Tamra, and her session is suggesting that bipolar disorder goes back thousands of years, and she links it to human DNA. And get this, a reduction from 12 strands down to 2.
Whoa,
Yeah.
that's a huge jump back in time and, well, a pretty out there claim when we're thinking about genetics, 12 strands of DNA. It
Yeah.
makes you wonder if what we're seeing here are just, two different interpretations of what's happening internally.
Yeah, exactly. Like two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Karina's got this historical narrative focusing on like observable behavior. And then Tamara's going way more esoteric, right? Energy systems, evolutionary shifts, all that.
Like trying to answer the same question, but from two totally different angles.
Yeah. And that's what makes this so intriguing, right? Even if they're not scientifically validated, they do make us think about how we understand mental health, personal narratives, cultural beliefs, all of that.
Yeah, what if those like subjective experiences, those internal struggles,
Yeah.
are just as important as the biological stuff, the neurological things that we typically focus on?
Right. So let's keep that in mind as we go deeper into this. We're really exploring the human side of bipolar disorder, all the complexity and mystery.
All right, so let's break down what they're saying about the potential causes.
Mm-hmm.
Karina seems to be leaning more towards a biological explanation.
Mm-hmm.
She's talking about a virus, bacteria, or even a fungus, something that disrupts brain function.
Interesting.
And then she goes on to connect it to modern diet and environment, saying that there's this overgrowth of harmful organisms.
Ah,
I mean, there's really no scientific evidence to support that specific claim. But there is that research about the gut-brain connection, how bacteria in our gut can actually impact mood. The gut-brain connection is definitely a hot topic right now.
right.
But then we have Tamara, who's going in a totally different direction. She's focused on things like electromagnetic influences, especially the impact of light, both natural and artificial light on our neural pathways.
Yeah, that's interesting, especially with, the growing concern about how technology and screens affect our brains. We need more research, but it's definitely something to think about.
Right. I mean, we've totally changed our electromagnetic environment in the last few decades. Who knows what that's doing?
Yeah.
So internal factors like biology, external factors like environment, is it both?
Yeah. I mean, mental health is hardly ever straightforward, right? It's usually a whole bunch of things together: genetic predisposition, environmental triggers.
Right, right. Now, both sessions are touching on this mind-body disconnect with bipolar disorder. So Karina describes it as like a weakened connection, like shortened nerve endings.
I see.
And then she visualizes people in a manic state. They need to move constantly, engage mentally,
Yeah.
just to maintain that brain-body link.
Oh, wow.
Like they're preventing their brain from retracting into itself.
That is a vivid image.
Isn't it? And it makes me think about how, people with bipolar disorder, they describe feeling restless, especially during those manic episodes.
Yeah.
Like they can't just relax. They need to keep moving, keep thinking, keep doing, just to feel connected.
Right. And it's interesting how Tamara, even though she's got a different take on the cause, she also emphasizes this, how the brain is dominating the body.
Yeah.
She talks about the brain creating illusions, even hallucinations, to stay in control, almost like it's trying to convince itself that it's still running the show.
Like a survival mechanism.
Maybe, yeah. Like it's trying to protect itself from being totally overwhelmed by how intense everything is.
That's fascinating. So what if that need for constant movement, activity, What if it's the body trying to, like, keep up with the brain?
Hmm. Like trying to bridge that gap between the internal and external world.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Like the body's just trying to keep pace with those racing thoughts,
Yeah.
all that heightened energy.
That's really interesting, and it highlights how complex bipolar disorder really is,
Hmm.
It's not just about brain chemistry, it's the whole mind and body. It's trying to handle these, like, extreme shifts in energy and how you perceive the world.
Okay, now things get really interesting. Both sessions talk about the chakra system.
Oh,
And just for those who might not be familiar, chakras, they come from Eastern traditions, and they're basically these energy centers throughout the body.
okay.
And it's fascinating how each session sees them totally differently.
Mhm.
So Karina is seeing these upper chakras as super bright, almost oversaturated, she says.
Oversaturated, okay.
Yeah, like there's some disruption of the normal energy flow, like they're working overtime,
Hmm.
trying to process all that excess energy.
I see. So that ties into what we were just talking about, that need to keep moving, keep thinking.
Yeah, like the energy is overflowing.
Okay.
And then you have Tamra, who sees those upper chakras as burned out, like dark embers, while the lower ones, the ones that are associated with like basic bodily functions, those are the ones that are active.
So two opposite interpretations.
Yeah.
What do we make of that?
Right. I mean, could it be that we're looking at two different sides of the bipolar experience? Karina's visualization, maybe that represents the manic state, that overwhelming surge of energy, while Tamra's, maybe that's more the depressive state, that sense of just exhaustion
Yeah.
and withdrawal.
Yeah. Two sides of the same coin, again. And it really shows how these subjective interpretations, even if they're not based on scientific models, can offer valuable insights into what it's like to live with bipolar disorder.
All right, hold on tight, because this is where it gets even more interesting. We're diving into some of the more metaphysical experiences.
Mm.
So Karina, for example, she talks about this feeling of being tossed back and forth during those mood swings, like she's a ball, just no control at all. And she even connects strong tastes and smells to being triggers for those shifts. Imagine that, your mood changing because of the smell of perfume or a certain food.
Wow. It's like that heightened sensitivity that a lot of people with bipolar disorder talk about.
Huh.
We can't scientifically say if smells actually do that, but it definitely shows how external things can affect you emotionally.
Like their senses are amplified, right? Like the
Yeah.
world feels much more intense, more overwhelming.
Yeah. And then there's Tamara, who describes those depressive episodes as entering a black cube of darkness, like isolation and disconnection. And this is where it gets pretty deep. She suggests that bipolar disorder might actually be like a punishment or some difficult life lesson. I know. That's a tough one. And it's important to remember that this is just one person's interpretation under hypnosis, not like a universal truth or anything. But it does make you wonder, are these visualizations supposed to be taken literally? Or are they more like symbolic representations of what they're feeling? Could they offer some insight into the experience, even if it's not scientifically validated?
Right. We're not saying these interpretations are right or wrong, but it's a window into how people are experiencing this condition,
Hmm.
on a really personal level. And it's fascinating that both sessions, even with their differences, they connect bipolar disorder to feeling high or having like a heightened awareness, almost like a godlike feeling.
Oh, yeah. That is a recurring theme. And it's interesting because it actually connects back to what we know about mania clinically. Inflated self-esteem and grandiosity are common symptoms.
Right. So how do they explain these feelings of like grandeur?
So Karina connects it to those overcharged upper chakras, the ones we talked about before. She's saying they lead to this exaggerated sense of power and understanding.
So it's like they're tapping into a different level of consciousness.
Maybe. But then you have Tamara, who offers two possibilities. Either the ego is just, like, totally dominating the person, or a negative entity is attaching itself to their energy field.
Whoa, that got dark quick.
Mm.
But again, subjective interpretations, not scientifically proven facts. But it makes you wonder if these experiences can be understood both psychologically and potentially, energetically.
Absolutely. It's like we're looking at a puzzle with many sides, trying to figure out the biology, the psychology, maybe even the spiritual side of all of this. And just when you thought it couldn't get any more interesting, Karina brings up technology.
Oh, yeah, she does. She mentions Tamagotchis. You remember those? The digital pets from way back.
Oh, yeah.
And then she talks about like modern electromagnetic fields, suggesting that maybe technology is playing a role in all of this, in those heightened sensitivities and mood swings.
Which ties back into what Tamara was saying about electromagnetic influences. There's no hard evidence yet, but it's a good question to ask. How is all this technology, all this invisible energy, How's it affecting our brains and our emotions? We might not even know yet.
It's like we're constantly bombarded with information and stimulation and artificial light. Our brains are just trying to keep up.
Yeah, that's a good point. And maybe, just maybe, for some people, especially those who are already predisposed to bipolar disorder, it could be pushing them over the edge, making it way harder to regulate their moods.
Definitely something to think about. Now, before we move on, I want to be clear. We're not saying we have all the answers here. We're just exploring these different perspectives and
Yeah.
encouraging everyone to think critically about the different ways we can understand bipolar disorder.
Exactly. This is about opening up the conversation, not shutting it down. We want people to question their assumptions, explore new possibilities, and consider all the different factors that might be involved in this complex, and fascinating condition.
Absolutely. So let's take a minute to think about what we've covered so far. What's sticking with you? What surprised you? What's challenging your beliefs about bipolar disorder? Take a moment, think about it, and we'll be back to explore even more intriguing aspects of these hypnotic regression sessions.
Welcome back. Ready to dig deeper into these unique perspectives on bipolar disorder?
Absolutely. I feel like we've just scratched the surface.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to unpack here.
Okay, so before we get too far into the more metaphysical stuff, let's talk about some of the physical health stuff that came up.
Okay.
So Karina's session, for example, she talks about a possible connection to heart problems.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, she's suggesting that all those, intense emotional swings and the body's constantly needing to be in motion, it can really put a strain on the cardiovascular system.
Hmm. I mean, it makes sense. There is some research suggesting a higher risk of heart disease in people with bipolar disorder.
So there could be a real physiological link.
Yeah, it's possible, but, correlation doesn't automatically mean causation. There could be other things going on. Lifestyle choices, medication side effects, even genetic predispositions. More research is needed, for sure.
Right, it's never just one thing.
Yeah.
Karina also mentions the hormonal system being affected, specifically the thyroid.
Yeah, the thyroid is definitely important. Thyroid dysfunction can actually look a lot like bipolar disorder, with the mood swings and energy changes. It's a good reminder that when we're diagnosing and treating mental health issues, we've got to rule out any underlying medical conditions.
Absolutely, got to look at the whole picture.
Yeah, the mind and body are connected.
Now, one of the most difficult things to talk about with bipolar disorder is the risk of suicide.
Right.
Karina's session suggests that maybe 10–15% of people with bipolar disorder might attempt suicide. She connects it to feeling trapped, like they're just stuck in this cycle of intense emotions, like they just can't get out.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. And it really underscores the need for more awareness, more understanding, and better support for people who are dealing with this.
It makes me think about all the people who are suffering silently, feeling like they're completely alone.
Yeah.
We need to create a space where people feel safe to open up about what they're going through and ask for help.
Yeah, definitely. It's about creating that culture of compassion and understanding.
So let's talk about who's more likely to experience bipolar disorder.
Hmm.
Both sessions had some interesting thoughts, but I'm not sure we can draw any definitive conclusions from them.
Right.
Karina suggests that it might be more prevalent in women, maybe because of all the roles they juggle. The responsibilities, the expectations.
It's more of a societal observation than anything scientific, but it does raise a good question. Could those expectations, those gender roles, could they actually be playing a part in mental health differences between men and women?
It's something to think about. We already know that women are diagnosed with things like depression and anxiety more often.
Yeah, and it really highlights the importance of looking at those bigger systemic issues, the ones that might be putting certain groups at a higher risk for mental health challenges.
Okay, so what about when bipolar disorder typically shows up? What's the age of onset?
Well, according to Karina's session, it can show up really early, even from birth.
Wow.
But the problem is, it's really tough to recognize and diagnose in infants and toddlers.
Yeah, I mean, how do you separate those normal developmental ups and downs from the signs of a serious mood disorder?
Right. It's tricky, and it highlights the need for really careful observation and early intervention if there are signs.
Yeah, definitely. So both sessions also touch on this feeling of being high or euphoric during those manic episodes.
Okay.
Karina compares it to being on drugs. She says that intense energy, the heightened awareness, it can be exhilarating, but also really disorienting.
It's important to remember that that high isn't sustainable or healthy. It usually leads to a crash, right? Back into depression. It's that cycle that's so characteristic of bipolar disorder.
That push and pull.
Exactly. And then Tamara, remember how she talked about feeling like a god during manic episodes? She thought it could be like an inflated ego.
Oh, yeah, or maybe even like a negative entity latching on. I'm still not sure what to make of that one.
I know, it gets a little out there. But regardless of how you explain it, those feelings of grandeur, of heightened awareness, they seem to be a big part of the bipolar experience for some.
It makes me think about the connection between bipolar disorder and creativity.
Hmm.
We often hear about artists and musicians who are dealing with this, right? And there's that whole idea of the tortured genius.
Yeah, it's a common trope. Both sessions actually suggest a link between bipolar disorder and these bursts of genius or insight. Karina even speculates that maybe some big historical discoveries were made by people during manic episodes.
So maybe there is some truth to that idea of the crazy creative genius.
It's possible. I mean, obviously, we can't say every artistic masterpiece or scientific breakthrough came from someone with bipolar disorder. But it does make you wonder about the link between mental health and creativity. Maybe people who experience the world differently, see things from a different angle, maybe they're the ones who can break through those boundaries and create something really special.
Yeah, that's a really cool way to think about it. Like their brains are wired for that kind of out-of-the-box thinking.
Exactly. It challenges our ideas about what's normal and abnormal.
Okay, so before we move on, I'm wondering what these sessions say about how to help people with bipolar disorder.
Well, they both really emphasize self-awareness and personal responsibility.
I'm sensing a theme here.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of these unconventional perspectives on bipolar disorder are saying that the individual has a big role to play in their own healing process. Karina, for example, talks about becoming a master of your own energy, learning what triggers those mood swings and figuring out how to handle those challenges. It's about really understanding your own experience, your own patterns.
It's like taking control instead of feeling like your emotions are controlling you.
Exactly. And Tara, she focuses on building a strong connection to your own intuition and inner wisdom. She thinks we all have this inner guidance system that can help us through tough times, but we have to learn how to listen to it.
Trusting your gut, even when everything feels chaotic.
Yeah, I like that. And it really lines up with what we know about self-care, mindfulness, and coping mechanisms. These sessions, even though they're not traditional, they're pointing to a lot of the same things we see in therapy.
So it's like all these different perspectives, all these different ways of understanding bipolar disorder, they're all leading to the same place: self-discovery, empowerment, taking responsibility.
Exactly. It's about figuring out what works for you, what helps you feel balanced and in control.
So as we wrap up this part of our dive, I want to thank you for taking us on this journey. It's been really eye-opening.
The pleasure's all mine. And remember, this is just the start. There's so much more to learn and understand about bipolar disorder.
And to anyone listening who might be struggling with bipolar disorder or knows someone who is, please know that you're not alone. There are resources out there, people who care, and there is hope.
And don't underestimate the power of connecting with others. Sometimes just knowing you're not alone in this can make all the difference.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you with something to think about. If these hypnotic regressions, even if they're symbolic, if they offer us a glimpse into what it's like to experience bipolar disorder, what does that tell us about listening to and honoring the different ways people experience it? What can we learn from their stories? How can we better support them? We encourage you to really reflect on these questions and keep the conversation going. Okay, so we're back, ready to wrap up this deep dive into bipolar disorder.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot from the science to the more spiritual side of things, but I found a couple more interesting things in these hypnotic regressions.
I'm all ears. What else did you find in there?
Well, both Karina and Tamara talk about this idea that bipolar disorder might be linked to being really sensitive, almost like psychic abilities.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. I've heard that before,
Mm.
but I've always been a little skeptical. What do they actually say about it?
So Karina talks about being able to see or feel other people's emotions really strongly, like an empath. She even thinks some people with bipolar disorder might be more in tune with energy fields or even spiritual realms. It's like their senses are turned way up, they're picking up on things most people don't even notice.
I wonder if that's part of what makes the emotions so intense in bipolar disorder. Like, if you're constantly feeling everyone else's emotions, that's got to be overwhelming.
Exactly. And Tamara, she talks about it too. She describes people with bipolar disorder as having these thin veils between themselves and other dimensions. And she thinks that makes them more open to outside influences, good and bad, more porous,
So it's not just about being sensitive to the physical world, but also to those energetic or spiritual realms.
That's what these sessions suggest. And, we can't really prove or disprove that scientifically, but it does give us a glimpse into what these individuals are experiencing.
It makes me think about how quickly we dismiss things we don't understand. Like, what if some of those symptoms are actually just heightened perceptions or sensitivities that could be used in a positive way?
That's a good point. Maybe we need to broaden our definition of normal and consider that these experiences, as challenging as they can be, might also have some untapped potential.
Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, both sessions also talk about past lives, karma, that kind of thing. I know that's a common topic in spiritual circles, but I'm curious to hear how it came up in these sessions.
Well, Karina describes a past life where she was a powerful leader who made some questionable decisions. And now she feels guilty, like she needs to make up for those actions in this life. She thinks her bipolar disorder is part of that.
So she's carrying that baggage from a past life into this one, and it's manifesting as bipolar disorder.
That's what she believes. And Tamra, she remembers a past life where she was a healer but got persecuted for it. So now she's afraid to express herself, tends to bottle up her emotions. And she thinks that's what's behind her bipolar disorder.
Almost like a wound on the soul that they're carrying with them.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And, whether or not you believe in past lives, it does make you think about how our experiences in this life, and maybe even in others, shape who we are. Could those unresolved traumas or patterns from the past be playing a role in our mental and emotional health today?
Definitely gives you something to think about. The human experience is so complex, and there's so much we still don't know about the mind and consciousness.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to something that came up in both sessions: self-awareness and personal responsibility.
Yeah, I'm seeing a pattern here. A lot of these unconventional views on bipolar disorder really emphasize the importance of the individual taking control of their own healing process.
You're right. Karina talks about the need to master your own energy, to figure out what sets off those mood swings and learn how to cope with those challenges. It's about really understanding your own experience.
It's like taking the reins instead of letting your emotions run wild.
Exactly. And Tamara focuses on building a strong connection to your own inner wisdom, your intuition. She thinks we all have this inner guide that can help us navigate tough times, but we need to learn how to tap into it.
Trusting yourself, even when the world feels like it's spinning. That's a powerful message.
It really is. And it fits with what we already know about taking care of yourself, practicing mindfulness, developing coping skills. Even though these sessions are outside the box, they're pointing towards a lot of the same things that work in therapy.
So it's like all these different perspectives, all these different ways of understanding bipolar disorder, they're all leading to the same path: self-discovery, empowerment, taking responsibility.
Exactly. It's about finding what works for you, what helps you feel balanced and in control.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into bipolar disorder, I want to thank you for taking us on this journey. It's been truly fascinating.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. There's so much more to explore and understand about this complex condition.
And to anyone listening who might be struggling with bipolar disorder or knows someone who is, please remember that you're not alone. There are resources available, people who care, and there is always hope.
And don't forget the power of human connection. Sometimes just knowing that you're not alone in this can make all the difference.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you with a final thought. If these hypnotic regressions, even if they're just symbolic, if they offer us a glimpse into what it's like to experience bipolar disorder, what does that tell us about listening to and honoring the different ways people experience this condition? What can we learn from their stories? How can we better support them? We encourage you to reflect on these questions and keep the conversation going.
Until next time, keep exploring.